program. So it's NBAA grand finale pre-event networking session. This is what we want the session to be, just have a chat, catch up with each other. We're doing what we know about what's happening around the place, and obviously it's been quite a couple of years, and COVID certainly had a big impact on employment. In the area I work in, I try and help unemployed people get into work, and I've found, probably against all expectations at the moment, and I'm be very pleased to get some input into this from various people. I'm finding it extremely difficult to meet employer demands for employees. And I'm not talking about high-skilled employees. I've got the sort of area that I operate in is, across the board really, but I've seen a great demand for factory hands, process workers, drivers, packers, those sorts of jobs. Employers just can't find them. So that's been my experience, and I'm going to call Jamie Lee Monk from Matchworks in, because I just want to check if my experience is peculiar to me or this is across the board. Jamie Lee, are you there?
Sure, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, good morning. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. We through Matchworks have, I guess, experienced the similar from what you've described with regards to the factory hand. We know that manufacturing is, I guess, an industry in demand as well, but with vaccination requirements, we are somewhat struggling to always fill the roles. We do have employers, obviously, that will, I guess, reach out to us hoping that we on our caseload will have candidates for them, but sometimes we're struggling just to get the referrals. So I definitely feel, as I agree with your comments, we do obviously, we've noticed cleaning as well has been an industry for us that has expanded throughout lockdown, COVID, and post-COVID as well. And thankfully, we've been able to place a lot of job seekers into cleaning opportunities because sometimes it's requiring low skill, whereas manufacturing and factory hand will somewhat require some level of skill or experience. So, yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Jamie Lee, can I just ask a question just in relation to that as well? Are you finding, and Mike, are you finding that the types of offers being made by employers have really differed over the last 12 months or so? Are you seeing less permanent offers of employment and more casual employment offers being made because of the uncertainty that sort of goes with COVID?
Yeah, I believe there's been a reluctancy to commit, absolutely. We're lucky enough in our contract to offer work trials. So we can obviously provide an employer an opportunity to test, so to speak, a job seeker's capabilities and then commit moving forward. But yeah, agreed. There's a reluctancy. But in saying that now, after this 6th lockdown, I think there's been more of an uptake and more of a boom back from where we had been in previous lockdowns. But yeah, absolutely, I think there's a small reluctancy.
I've found a bit of a mixed bag, really. In fact, I'm finding some employers are so desperate to get workers, they are offering permanent employment, and they're also saying to me, even if they don't have experience, we'll train them. That's the sort of level of desperation some employers are at. Yep. Who's that?
It's John Gilbert, sorry.
Oh, good, John. I was going to call on you, John, actually, because John operates at a little bit of a different level of recruitment. So I'm very interested to hear your perspective, John.
Good morning. Sorry for arriving late. All the predictions leading at the beginning of the pandemic was that permanent recruitment would be dead in the water, contracting would be the way to go. There'd be a reluctance on the part of employers to commit to permanent employees, etc. that myth is completely blown out of the water. Certainly in all of the white collar jobs, the tendency is firstly to employ permanently. The mood of the employment market is that there are few people looking for work. Doesn't mean people aren't willing to transfer or move, but there are fewer people looking for work. Those people looking to move are looking for companies that have been able to articulate and demonstrate their employee value proposition, which is really around flexibility. Through the pandemic, key people were retained, so that when they think about moving or commit to making a move, the organisation they work for is countering with an offer, which is taking them back out of the market. And employers who move too slowly in making a decision when they have a candidate in front of them suitable to do the job are generally losing that candidate very quickly, because there are many, many job opportunities for that same candidate in the market. So scarce candidates, lots of opportunity, counter offer, and permanent employment is really the trend rather than contract work.
Do we have an employer on the line that might be able to relate their experience in trying to recruit? Is there anyone there that's willing to speak? No?
I'm willing to say a couple of words. I'm Cathy Henderson. I'm a CEO at Moreland. Local government employment is in probably a bit of a different space, where a lot of the employment that's difficult for us to get has been heightened by the pandemic, but areas such as environmental health, public health is really hard for us. And anything to do with transport engineers or project management, we're really crowded out by Victoria's big build in those areas where it's just absorbed so many of our potential engineers and project managers. And then the government's doing lots of work, state government's doing lots of work in the planning space, so they've taken a lot of our planners as well. So there's no doubt that local government is facing issues with employment. I'm not so sure it's totally pandemic related. Lots of local governments have lost some people due to vaccination issues and health issues, but probably international students weren't an employee base for us in a lot of the way that many industries have been. So it is challenging, and the Great Resignation, I'm not sure if it's right or not. And at Moreland, my feeling is we're probably benefiting from the Great Resignation as much as we might be disadvantaged by it. So there's a lot of things shaking down at the moment. It's pretty tricky. I'll be interested to see what happens with the sectors we're talking about here, and in manufacturing and hospitality and other things, as international students come back, and we hope they do come back. But as international students come back, what that means for whether things are bouncing back or whether these are permanent employment shortages in the medium term, at least. So interested to hear what others think.
I think that the key issue is that employers need to be working on their business to be able to articulate and demonstrate why a person would want to join them. And that's been the major shift. The major shift is employers aren't employing people, people are employing employers. And therefore, it's so important for leadership, management, to be able to plan their needs, to be able to articulate their value proposition. And that value proposition at varying levels is really around flexibility. It's around work-life patterns fitting into work. It's also about money, but money's not necessarily the key driver at the moment. It really is, it's a bit of a hackneyed statement, but it is that work-life balance issue that is key. So, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why organisations are investing so heavily in upgrading systems, because if you're going to work remotely, you need robust systems. But you also need robust management to be able to keep the teams together while they're working apart, and to keep the performance and productivity going in the work cycles that the business demands. And that's a hell of a challenge for leadership at the moment.
I'd like to ask the question how we got to this situation. I mean, there was an expectation as a result of the pandemic that there'd be huge numbers of people put on the unemployment market. How is it that we're at a situation now where, John, I take on board the need to try and attract people, but why are we in that situation? Why aren't there many more people going for jobs that we actually have to go out of our way to attract them?
Well, here's a classic. I heard the other day that PricewaterhouseCoopers have 1,600 vacancies in Australia. 1,600. Now, why is that so? Well, obviously they're a global company and they have a global population, and they have people transferring around the globe. Well, the pandemic has certainly affected that. People aren't transferring. You've got employers still thinking that there are trained people out there to get, when in fact employers should be thinking about people's attitudes, behaviours, values, integrity and skills, and then thinking about what is it that they need to do to invest in this person to bring them up to speed. So there's an attitude still where employers are looking for that immaculate candidate, and we'd like to see 3 of them on a short list. Well, they're not in the marketplace. And they're just not in the marketplace. And you take the point that Cathy made about project managers. It's all very well having the big build, but the big build is running in simultaneous cycles for everybody. So everybody wants an estimator at the beginning. Everybody wants a project manager at the start, and everybody wants a painter at the end. And there's just not the people available to do that. Now that comes back to the education system. I mean, I did some checking the other day with RMIT, and they've had to completely pivot to online training, and I'm sure that's true of La Trobe as well. They've had to pivot to keep their students, and many of their students were international students. So that now those international students are not even in Australia to pick up that part-time hospitality work. But the education institution is still delivering. They've pivoted and they're still delivering their courses, but those people are not in Australia anymore. I think I heard the other day that the University of Tasmania is basically not going to have anyone on campus. It's all online. There's so many factors, Mike.
We do have Donna from La Trobe University on this session, and clearly that's an important factor about what impact is looking to the future workforce. What impact has COVID had on the education and training system, and what are the implications for future employment and the demand for skills?
Yeah, look, absolutely. We know that the education sector has been absolutely decimated by the pandemic, and our international students have really, really suffered. But in saying that, our domestic students have suffered as well. So they're not getting the level of education that they signed up for. So the universities have really, in John's words, really had to pivot. We had to move very, very quickly at the first sign of COVID and the first hint of this word called a lockdown, which we'd never really heard of before, and what that would mean for an institution. We had to move every single course that we could possibly move online, which meant that our educators had to adapt and be agile very, very quickly. A lot of our educators had no idea how to run an online program. So talking about the use of technology, the way we actually deliver our programs is very, very different. So a huge and quick learning curve had to be undertaken by our educators, but we've been doing it for 20 months now. Look, it's got pros and cons. Our international students have been absolutely delighted that they could actually continue on with their studies. But then on the downer, our domestic students have missed that face-to-face. Our international students have missed the socialisation, the getting to know one another, and the global sort of outreach that we talk about in all of our courses. Moving forward, La Trobe University is thankfully offering both face-to-face and online next year. We haven't been able to do that this year, but our numbers are trending upwards, which is amazing. Fingers crossed, our international students are all packing their bags as we speak. But we have lost a lot of students to the likes of Canada, the USA, even Germany, who have opened up all their borders, and so they're stealing a lot of our students. But this has come at a great cost for universities. So, pivoting to online, but plus in 2022, offering face-to-face components as well as online, it's doubled our cost. So we've had to hire an influx of a sessional lecturing staff, and we've had to go out and find that talent as well, because it wasn't in front of us necessarily.
And Donna, would you venture a comment on what implications this has for the delivery of skills that industry is going to need? Is it set it back, or?
Absolutely, it set it back. I think it was John that mentioned, the CEO of Moreland mentioned the impact and the significant impact it's had on even, the tourism and hospitality sector. La Trobe produces hundreds of graduates in the tourism and hospitality space each year. But they haven't been able to undertake their practical work component. So they're behind the eight ball already, without that practical work experience in getting a job or being successful in the marketplace in getting a job. We know that the graduating students, even last year and this year, are extremely keen on entering the workforce immediately. But to be frank, and I've heard it so many times, the money that's afforded to them from the government is a lot better than an entry-level position at this point in time. So while the handouts are still coming thick and fast, unfortunately, the younger generation is happy to stay at home. That, universities have really tried to create online courses, but micro-credentialed courses, so the smaller bite-sized chunks whereby people at home can actually undertake a course that will give them credit into a full degree. And we're seeing a lot of uptake in the executive education type courses. And what we're trying to do in that space is really give some profound learnings and teachings into work-ready programs. So if we're forced into another lockdown, God forbid, we can give them those sort of practical skills that they need without actually having to be on site.
Good. Thanks, Donna. I think John was about to make a comment, so I'll let John do that. Then I'm going to bring you in, Luke, in a moment. John, did you have a comment?
Well, just an anecdote and how things come together. Outback and rural Australia is a destination for overseas students and overseas backpackers. And the hospitality industry thrives on those people working in pubs in Inaminka and the Birdsville pub and wherever else. I went through in April, and you could see that the tourism industry had invested a lot in infrastructure to upgrade accommodation and the like, and they had no staff whatsoever to run it because there's just no international people coming into the country that would normally go into those sorts of jobs. And there's no local people coming through that are qualified or interested to do that. I mean, even at the height of the tourism industry, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, I found one local Australian from Sale working at Mount Dare, and everyone else out back was international. So, there's a scarcity of people, but there's also an attitude generally, and it comes back to what I was saying about work-life balance now. What's in the job for me beyond the money? There's a real attitude now towards work, which is very different today to what it was some years ago.
All right, Luke, I'm going to bring you in here now. Obviously, COVID is and the issues of contracting COVID or someone in the workplace contracting it has raised a whole lot of issues from employers. In terms of what happens if someone's got COVID, what are the legal ramifications? Can you give us a bit of an insight, if you like, on what is this impacting on employers? How they go about their hiring processes, or what's the uncertainty doing? And so I'll get your comment. And again, if there are any employers online that want to make a comment, please do so.
Sure. Look, I think, touch wood, we're through the worst of it. We've gone through that period last year where we had a lot of stand downs. We're seeing job losses, pay reductions, salary freezes, all those types of things. And then we sort of, more recently for me, I've been advising clients in relation to the vaccination mandates, and overlapping that is a work health and safety sort of focus around ensuring that your employees are working in a safe place of work, and what is the exposure, what are the risks of them contracting or spreading COVID, and what are the relevant safety measures that can be put in place to mitigate those risks. For the most part in Victoria, a lot of the difficulty around that has been dealt with by the government mandating vaccination. So instead of employers having to do risk assessments and making their own call as to whether they should mandate vaccinations or not, the government's really done that for us, at least over the last few months. So that's made that difficult decision for a lot of employers a lot easier. We're certainly seeing nearly all of my clients would have one or two, depending on the size of the client, or maybe a few employees that are hesitant to get the vaccination, or even anti-vaxxers. And so we're advising a lot of clients in relation to how they deal with those employees. But for the most part, as I say, I think we're through the worst of it. Employers are now managing and going through that transition period of having their staff come back. And one thing that I think COVID has done is it's really, for those areas where work can be performed other than on site, COVID's really opened up an awareness of the opportunities for ongoing flexible working arrangements in terms of the way we work. And John sort of touched on this in terms of flexible working arrangements already, but there's been some reports on this. I've read a preliminary report that was commissioned by the Fair Work Commission, and they identify 5 options, if you like, for flexible working. One is or non-flexible working. The first is completely coming back into the office where there's no real flexibility. Very few employers we're seeing are doing that. Working permanently remotely is at the other end of the spectrum, where what we're seeing more of, though, is this situation where there's a mandated frequency per week where people are expected to come into the office. It might be 3 days a week, but employees have the flexibility to choose which of those days they will come in. What am I up to? That was the third. The fourth is where you've got both the number of days and which days of the week, are fixed. The employer mandates that. And then, of course, the most flexible is employees just choosing whether they want to work from home on 1 week entirely, in the office a few days the next, and just sort of pick and choose. And in part, look, which option will be most suitable will really depend on the particular role. The initial question is, can the inherent requirements of the role be performed from home indefinitely? And so it's really interesting actually to see the way that's evolved. My experience in talking to different clients about this is that some organisations are heading down very different paths to other employers in their approach to this.
Yeah, and Luke, just to trying to extract a bit of free legal information, what does the little metal manufacturer down the road do when one of his employees says, "No, I'm not getting vaccinated"?
Yeah, look, I think the first step is to have a discussion with the individual and try and understand why. I've been advising clients not to sort of rush into that termination or disciplinary outcome. That said, though, that is a classic example of where the role cannot be, the inherent requirement of the roles requires attendance at the work location. And as I said, the government's actually made it quite easy for employers to be able to say, well, look, this is not, because a lot of employees, we're finding those types of employees are resistant and express their hesitancy or their reluctance to get vaccinated as against the employer. The response by employers is really quite easy now, in that it should be, look, we're not forcing you to get vaccinated. That's your choice, and we accept that. However, it's illegal for us to allow you on site to perform your job unless you're vaccinated. And in those circumstances, we can't continue to employ you. It's as simple as that. So, yeah, a lot of my clients have had that difficult conversation or sent correspondence to their employees along those lines, maybe given them a week or two to consider it, maybe allow them to take a period of leave. You know, I would recommend for a defined period, not indefinitely. You know, okay, take leave for a couple of weeks, have a think about it, but we need to know by this particular date as to whether you're vaccinated or not, because if you're not, after that date, we're going to have to terminate your employment. That's paid leave? It could be paid leave if they've got enough leave accrued, or you might agree with the individual that they might take a period of unpaid leave. So that's always an option, subject to agreement between the employer and the employee. Okay. All right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I do want to open it up if someone's there wanting to ask a question or make a comment.
I think if I can just sort of summarise about moving forward, in terms of what can we do about all of this, I think I mentioned it before, organisations need to treat their human resource planning strategy as being critically important to delivering their business planning strategy. You know, the days of this is my plan, this is my strategy, and I'll go and find people to deliver it, that's all gone. So you need to be planning your workforce and your needs in your workforce over quite a horizon. There needs to be a lot of thought and investment given to bringing the people within the business up to other levels of competency for retaining those people, or for redeploying those people, or just for showing those people that you care about them beyond them doing the job. And that throws the light back onto leadership around the techniques of engagement, particularly, and of workforce, and being able to not just articulate what the employee value proposition is when you're in the hiring mode, but to actually demonstrate it in the culture of the organisation that you're building and that you want to maintain. So there's a lot of other things, but it really, this period moving on is really about businesses reflecting on what they are, what they want to be, what they want their people to do, how they want to retain their people, how they want to show that investment and care in those people, etc. So it's a lot of work on business, I think, moving forward to really capture the mood. Thanks, John. We are out of time, so thanks everyone for your participation and for viewing in. And now we'll cross over to the award ceremony. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone.